Welcome to QueerTWENTY, the cohort of 2023. QueerTWENTY is EvoMonk's annual flagship program where we celebrate exceptional 20 queer Indians. Today, we have a very interesting person with us, Richa Vashista. Richa is an integrative psychologist, and her diverse perspective stems from working in both the public and private sector. Richa has been contributing towards the mental health ecosystem for over 9 years and offers therapy and counseling for South Asian clients globally. This includes both monogamous and polyamorous individuals. Their worldview is queer affirmative, neurodiverse, intersectional, and centered on social justice. Richa, thank you so much for joining us today. Without further ado, let's talk to Richa. You live in a unique intersection of uh, being a queer and being a neurodivergent queer. Could you shed some light on how this journey has been for you um, across these both identities?
Thank you for that question. So when I introduce myself, I like to talk about a few very important identities to me. So I start with telling people that my name is Richa and my pronouns are she and they. And what that means is that I don't identify as a woman. And that's very important to me because, of course, when most people, look at me, will be around me, especially a lot in corporate spaces, will use the word ma'am for me. So that comes up very naturally that, oh, ma'am, can I? And I know it's coming from a space of respect, but I don't really relate with that word or term because I know for me, when we call someone ma'am, it is when we're calling a woman. So I try to tell people to just call me by my name. And I know it's very difficult, especially in corporate spaces, because we feel like, no, we're disrespecting somebody. A very second important identity I like to talk about myself is being queer. That what that means is that I can be attracted to anybody regardless of what their gender identity is. Um, and I think I came out to myself as a queer person in 2015. So it's been a couple of years, and since then there has been, no looking back. I think with each day I've been able to accept this identity a lot more. Um, but there have been struggles because mental health. I had like a lot of struggles with my mental health from the beginning, with the, how I felt about things, how I interacted with the society, how the society interacted with me. So I always knew that I have mental health issues, but I never knew what it was. I had no idea. And then it's not because of this, but I also chose to work in the space of therapy. So I did my master's in clinical psychology. I became a therapist. And while I was studying, you come to know a lot of terms, right? You hear words like depression, bipolar, personality disorders, etc., etc. So I started to learn a lot more about it. And as students, we want to be like, oh, this person probably has this, that person probably has that. And I think for a very long time, I thought that I had depression. And I remember previously, like way back when I had visited a psychiatrist, they said, yeah, you have depression. And I was like, yeah, okay, that's what it is. And I used to stick with that. Okay, I live with depression. It's very difficult. I experience a lot of issues with, feeling helpless, struggling with doing things on a daily basis. But then when I started to get more into my field of working, I felt like there's something missing here. There's something that I'm not understanding better. And I don't know where I learned about borderline personality, of course, through the DSM because that was my work. Um, but I read about borderline personality disorder. When I read the symptoms, I felt like, yeah, this, does make a little bit of sense. But then I wanted to go on Google to read a lot of first person experiences. And when I read those first person experiences, I felt like this is something that I definitely relate to. Fast forward in 2018, I went to a psychologist, a clinical psychologist who did a thorough assessment with me, and I received a diagnosis of borderline personality disorder. It was relieving because it was just not in my head. It was the reality, and I thought that was very important. So whenever I talk about myself, I like to talk about these three very important identities to me because it shapes who I am as a person, personally as well as professionally.
Thank you, Richa, for sharing that with us. Talking about these identities, something comes to my mind, which is that, especially in the mental health arena, a lot of the times, an individual is looked at and a lot of focus is given to individual struggles. While that is important, it has been mine and a lot of my friends' experience that, the systemic issues that surround this individualistic experience is not necessarily counted or like validated or and even like this is one is a therapeutic space, but even when we see around content floating around on mental health issues, there is so much emphasis on an individualistic problem without referring that these are born out of a systemic environment, right? Now, with that as a context, whenever a mental health professional is dealing with, let's say, queer identities, queer clients, um, how important it is for this therapist to have knowledge of these systemic issues and if they can use this knowledge about systemic discrimination in their therapeutic practices.
I think that's a great question. And it takes me back to this time when I started practicing as a therapist in 2014. Um, I remember that my role was very much restricted to a therapy space, being with my clients, supporting them in their journey, offering all the support that I could. But then when I started to work with queer people, so my first job was in an organization that worked with queer people. So from the beginning, I started to work with queer people, and I realized just being in a therapy room with them was not enough. It was very important to then understand where they are coming from. What kind of homes they're coming from, what kind of institutions they're coming from, what kind of a corporate or like a workplace they are part of. And that's where systems then also kind of came into place. What kind of a system we are all largely a part of, how supportive these systems are for people like us. And when the systems are not supportive, there's just a lot of social injustice that anyway happens. Whether you're a woman in the country, whether you're a queer person in the country, or let's say you're a person with a disability, right? Um, so I think as a therapist, and this is something that I have been practicing, I also supervise a lot of therapists, and this is what I tell them as well, is that whenever you are offering any support, you need to offer it from a very social justice oriented point of view. You need to understand what is the kind of social injustice that this client is particularly bringing into a therapy session, and your support is not just about what is it that they can do, but you also need to understand what is the kind of environment they're coming from, right? So using that as an approach is very important. Also keeping in mind intersectionality, right? Because when you're trying to talk about systems, you're also then trying to understand who's a part of these systems. And that's why using an intersectional approach is also very important because people people with different identities make a person. And I need to understand how the society is responding to that one identity and how that person is responding to the society, right? So if, for example, we're looking at a queer Muslim, this person has two intersecting identities here that are then contributing to how the society is going to deal with them. And if this queer Muslim is coming to therapy to me, I need to then keep that in mind that, okay, what are their struggles going to look like? I need to be cognizant of that when they are looking at me for support.
Um, when situations like these happen, right? let's say Supreme Court verdict, or like what our government is doing when it comes to the ongoing genocide. Now, these are very systemic issues that will affect any individual who pays close attention to what is happening, whether it directly affects them or not. Like for the verdict, it directly affects the queers. But for the ongoing genocide, although it doesn't directly affect us, it's hard not to feel all those emotions and all those thoughts when something as grave as that is happening. In situations like this, could you tell what a therapist's role could be in helping the client um, process or even like go through the thoughts that they are going through?
Thank you for that question. Um, it reminds me of a conversation I had with one of my clients just yesterday, where they were talking about what's happening around the world, and they were telling me ki if this is happening, um, if this is what's happening, I am very scared that this is going to happen in India tomorrow. This is definitely something that's going to happen in India tomorrow. And I could sense that they felt very threatened, right? They felt very threatened for their own life, for their family, for their friends, for their safety and security, living in this country. And I think that's where intersectionality also then again comes into the picture, that people of different intersections, whether we're talking about somebody who comes from who's who comes from a religion that is considered a threat in this country, or somebody's gender identity, somebody's sexuality. Uh, a lot of a lot of people at these intersections are feeling threatened on a daily basis, right? Like when the entire marriage equality hearing was going on, there were people who were just like, I don't think India is ready for this. This is so not going to get passed. But then there were a lot of queer people who were very hopeful about it as well. And I think as a therapist, what I do is that I try to create that space for my clients to be able to grieve, right? I think grief has been very strong right now. Grieve the fact that this judgment was not passed. You had certain thoughts, you had certain hopes, you had certain beliefs that this is something, if the judgment came out, I would have had a certain life. So creating space for that grief, that if things didn't go the way you thought they were going to go. Also creating space for grief with the entire genocide and what's happening. We might not know people personally, but we can see what's happening, and it's causing a lot of distress to people in general, and it makes them question their safety and security. So I remember I have this other, uh, person of color client living overseas in the UK, and they want to be a part of protests in support of Palestine. And they realize that because they're a person of color, they're at a risk because they're not white, they're not British, they're not in the they're very much in the UK. So we need to then, and this is where again intersectionality comes into role, of how people with different intersections still feel very much at risk. There's so much of racism that I witness or I speak about or address in a therapy room with my clients overseas. And I think it is a very, very difficult state, for a lot of people. I know so many clients who tell me that I feel like a second class citizen over here. I don't feel welcome. I had very different thoughts. I know so many queer people, so many queer clients who decided to leave the country because our country is not very supportive in terms of like our legal system. So they thought they'd have a better life when they move abroad. Um, so there's just so much of grief in all of these examples that I'm sharing with you. And what I do is I try to hold space for that grief, for people to share, what they're experiencing, what they're going through, how that's impacting them in that current moment.
Thank you for that answer. I just realized something like, a lot of times, when I am angry about something, I don't catch it in time. That my anger is born majorly a lot of times, especially when it comes to systemic issues about grief. And although I address my anger by either um participating in activist spaces or like educating myself further on the systemic issues and how I have my methods of channeling that anger. I rarely touch grief. Um so thank you. That was a unexpected insight I had through this session.
I
Probably like
also want to add, since you mentioned anger, and I don't think I addressed it enough, but I also want to add that, especially as a person with, borderline personality traits, anger and rage are very strong emotions for me as well. And I've had my own fair share of like trying to work with my anger, trying to understand my emotions better. Um, and I don't remember when I realized this, but I look at anger not as a bad thing, because most times, like the entire society, people have always told me anger buri baat hai, anger is a bad thing. But now I look at anger as not a bad thing, but my anger is trying to say something. My anger is trying to protect me from something. It is, there could be hurt behind that anger. So I'm hurt about something and I'm expressing it using my anger. So my anger is then acting as a voice for something that I'm not okay with, right? Like how you mentioned, being a part of activism spaces to be able to then express that anger, because you're feeling unheard, you're feeling not seen, and you'd like to then express that anger. So I think it's very important to then remind ourselves that anger is not bad. How we choose to express our anger is something that we, can think about.
yeah, thanks for sharing that. I really resonate with that. Because I have also been diagnosed with BPD, and and it's been 4 years that I have been diagnosed. It's been almost a year and a half that I have been on a therapy that finally worked. Although I have been in and out of psych circles for like 8 years now, right? Because I went through all those misdiagnoses and stuff like that. But coming back to BPD traits and anger, I don't think I ever felt anger. It was always rage. Um, like I do not feel emotions in moderation. One, I don't understand the emotions I feel half the times. The only two prominent ones, even at the age of 30, and sometimes I'm a little embarrassed about that. That is an understatement. But to not know your own emotions. Rage is the prominent one, and the other is usually like a numbness, which I'm not sure if it is an emotion, but it is an emotional state that is very prominent in my experience, right? And I think a lot of times, because these are not the tools that are taught to us, essential life skills, essential life tools, that these are not taught to us when we are growing up. This is why we grow up with all these assumptions कि गुस्सा करना बुरी बात है, लड़कियों ने गुस्सा तो बिल्कुल नहीं करना चाहिए, this is not a good quality, all these things. Do you have like a tool that you use or something like that to understand what emotions you are feeling? I usually use that circle tool that has been floating around.
So I think what you're talking about is the emotional wheel.
Yeah, yeah.
That definitely is very helpful. Even if you, I think for people, there are different ways of how you can kind of understand your emotions better. One way could be through journaling on a daily basis. Just sit down and ask yourself, what are some different emotions I might have experienced today? When you're taking that effort on a daily basis, you're actually taking more time to reflect on what my day must have looked like today. Um, and the more we do that, we're also a lot more aware that, okay, I think right now I might have just snapped. Maybe right now I was happy, and then 10 seconds later, I'm splitting about something and I am suddenly very angry, right? So if I can just sit down and take a few moments and journal about it, just write whatever it is that's coming up for me, just write about it. The more I do that, I will start to observe my emotions a lot more in detail, a lot better. Um, and I like to, so with for people with BPD, there is a word called emotional regulation. That is something that we use, right? You're regulating your emotions. I think it's very important to understand what your emotions can look like. I did relate to you when you said that moderation में बिल्कुल नहीं होता है. For me also, I'm going from a 0 to 100, and I did not even realize. So like I didn't even realize when that happened or why that happened or how that happened. But I think the more control you have over your emotions instead of your emotions having over you, you will be able to kind of then understand कि ठीक है, 0 से 100 चला गया है, वो हमारे, it was not in our control, but now can I get that back to maybe like a 60 or a 50, right? So I feel being in consistent therapy definitely helps. Self work isn't always possible. It can take a lot, it can take a longer. But just, like the emotional wheel you spoke about, just look at the emotional wheel, create like a printout, put it in front of you, and look at it and ask yourself, did I feel any of this today? Did I experience any of this today? And if I did, can I write about it? That's like journaling, I feel, is a very strong tool because that piece of paper where you're journaling is holding all of the emotions you're trying to talk about, right? So you're trying to let it out of your system and you're putting it on a piece of paper.
You work with a lot of corporates on their health and wellness programs. Um, can you share an example or an incident, any anecdote where your work or like your help to such corporations about queer inclusion or mental health support has shown good results for the benefactors of that support?
Um, so I remember there was a particular company I used to work with. It was a company in the media space, and I used to go in person to like do workshops, offer therapy. And I remember there was this one cisgendered man who was in therapy with me, and he and his wife were just going to deliver a child in the next 1 month. And I remember he telling me that, oh, my wife is going to, take a maternity leave, but I won't be able to because this company does not have any paternity leave. So I took his consent and I decided to speak to the HR, and I told the HR that I've taken consent and this is something that's come out of our therapy session, that this particular company does not have any paternity leave. And in the next 15 days, they made sure that they got that policy in place. And I feel like that was a very huge win because 1 month later, that client of mine was able to take, even if it was a 15-day paternity leave, he was able to at least take those 15 days off. And I feel like um, it's a two-way street here. I was able to point that out, take it to the company, but it's also then on the company, right? Are you going to take that effort, do or something about it, make that change? Then I remember there was another company I was approaching during Pride Month, and I usually do that. If I'm doing a workshop with a company, I would also like to talk to them about other services that I can offer. And I remember that company, it's a big company, so I don't want to take names. It was a big company, but then they said that, oh, we have a therapy platform in place. So they have like an EAP provider. And my only question to them was that, does your EAP provider offer support for queer people? Are they queer affirmative? Do they understand what it means to be queer affirmative? And they were just a little taken aback. They didn't know how to respond. They realized that yes, they have a EAP provider who might be a bunch of therapists offering support, but you don't know if these therapists are equipped to then work with queer clients. Is the language they're using inclusive? Are they socially competent to be able to support queer people? Are they keeping in mind that very basic things like asking people their pronouns, gender, sexuality is going to validate me and my experiences as a queer person? So we had that little bit of a conversation, and after that, they realized that, okay, this is something that we need to definitely work on. And after that, since then, we've been working together. I offer that one aspect of getting queer inclusivity in that organization that the EAP is probably not able to offer. Right. So these are two examples that come to my mind right now.
If you could describe your coming out experience in one word.
I think very surprised. Definitely very
Okay.
surprised because I thought I was a cisgender heterosexual till about 2014. So it was very surprising to then realize that, okay, no, I think there is something I need to understand and explore here for myself.
What queer stereotype annoys you the most?
I think just gender stereotypes, right? Like if you're a very flamboyant person, pakka gay hoga. If you have short hair, lesbian hair. Like just because people are experiencing themselves a certain way, we just want to stereotype people based on that.
Yeah. So, what is one thing that you would like to see be changed for queer neurodivergent folks in your life?
I think accepting people with the differences they come with and not looking at it as deficit.
I love that. I love that. Pick one: queer poetry slam or a drag show.
Drag show, because I feel like I haven't seen enough of them.
Yeah. Uh, One line guidance for folks in executive and leadership positions for queer and neurodivergent inclusion.
You might feel like you know everything, but just sometimes accept that you don't and just like be open to learning and learning from people and their lived experiences.
Yeah. All right. So I'm going to say like a couple of words, and whatever words, image, or even non-verbal reaction, should you have those, that a lot of our speakers have just rolled eyes and made faces. So making like non-verbal reaction are more than welcome here. Okay. Um, Diversity and inclusion.
I think it's like everybody's an expert nowadays.
Allyship.
Again, everybody feels they're an ally and they are doing they're literally doing मतलब एहसान कर रहे हैं हमारे पे allyship दिखा के.
Queerphobia.
Uh, I think that in my life it has definitely reduced a lot dealing with queerphobic people, but I know it still exists in the society.
India.
Bharat apparently.
Queer stories.
We need to have a lot more, whether it is mainstream, whether it is media. I feel like everybody who's queer can talk about their story, only if they're comfortable, of course.
Yeah. Okay, with that, we wrap our interview.